The dawn over the city was a quiet affair, a slow bleeding of purple night into soft orange day. For Mara Thompson, the morning rhythm was as familiar as her own reflection. The Harbor Street Diner, with its patched vinyl booths and softly gleaming chrome counter, was her world. At 27, she moved through life with quiet endurance. Her waitress uniform softened by years of wear, her smiles for customers a small but consistent act of defiance against the weariness that clung to her bones. For 3 years, the corner booth had been occupied by Mr. Harlan at precisely 6:15 a.m. He was a man carved from silence and old wool, a fixture as reliable as the sunrise. His routine never varied. A black coffee, the newspaper, and a quiet hour of reading before disappearing back into the city. Mara knew his patterns. Her kindness, extending to ensuring his cup was never empty and his space was never disturbed. Their interactions were a silent ballet of poured coffee and murmured thanks, a connection built not on words, but on consistency. But this morning, the rhythm was broken. Mr. Harlan sat in his booth, but the newspaper lay folded and untouched. The space before him was empty. No coffee. He simply sat, his gnarled hands resting on the formica table, his pale blue eyes fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. It wasn't a leer or a friendly gaze. It was a deep, searching look, as if he were trying to memorize the very architecture of her face, to imprint her image onto his soul. A subtle unease prickled at the back of Mara's neck. This deviation from their unspoken script felt seismic, the first note of a discordant song. She approached him, her clean rag wiping a spotless table nearby. "Everything okay, Mr. Harlan? Can I get you your coffee?" she asked, her voice soft. He didn't speak. His eyes, clouded with a deep, bottomless sadness, held hers for a moment that stretched far too long. Then he gave a single, almost imperceptible shake of his head and looked away, out the window, as if the conversation was over. Mara retreated behind the counter, her heart thumping a strange, irregular rhythm. The diner, usually a place of comforting noise, now felt oppressively silent. His familiar quiet had been replaced by a different kind of stillness, the kind that precedes a storm. At 7 o'clock, he rose stiffly from his seat. He didn't look at her as he laid a $5 bill on the table, far too much for a coffee he never ordered, and walked out into the waking world. Mara watched him go, a solitary figure swallowed by the harsh morning light. She picked up the bill. It felt heavy and significant in her hand, a token for a transaction she didn't understand. The next day, 6:15 a.m. came and went. The corner booth remained empty, a hollow space that seemed to echo. At 6:30, the diner door chimed. A man in an impeccably tailored black suit entered, his eyes scanning the room before landing squarely on Mara. He approached the counter, his expression unreadable, and asked a question that would split her life in two. "Are you Mara Thompson?" The man introduced himself as Mr. Sterling, a friend and lawyer for Arthur Harlan. The use of his first name, Arthur, felt strangely intimate to Mara, who had only ever known him as the silent Mr. Harlan. As rain began to streak the diner window, blurring the world outside into a watercolor smear of gray and green, Mr. Sterling produced a thick, cream-colored envelope from his inner pocket. It was sealed with a bit of dark red wax, and her name, Mara Thompson, was written on the front in an elegant, spidery cursive. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. Inside, there was no long letter, no explanation, just a single slip of heavy cardstock. On it, 5 words were written in the same dark ink. "I owe you everything." Harlan. 5 words. They shouldn't have had the power to tilt her world on its axis, but they did. Oh, the math of their relationship was simple, a transaction of coffee for cash. It didn't add up to everything. A confusing cocktail of emotions flooded her. Disbelief, a strange flutter of hope, and a deep, unsettling curiosity. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the patter of rain. Mr. Sterling's expression was somber. "There's more," he said gently. "Arthur Harlan passed away peacefully 2 nights ago." The news was a physical blow. She stumbled back a step, her hand gripping the counter for support. The old man with the sad eyes was gone. The finality of it crashed over her, mingling with the shock of the cryptic message. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and unbidden, Grief for a stranger warring with the unsettling mystery he had left behind. He named you in his will, Mr. Sterling continued, his voice low and compassionate. The reading is this afternoon. His will? The word felt alien, belonging to a world of family, history, and lives that left deep footprints. Not for waitresses who served black coffee. She looked from a note in her hand to her own reflection in the rain-streaked window. The words, "I owe you everything," seemed superimposed over a confused, tear-streaked face. The world outside was a blur, just as her future had suddenly become. Mr. Sterling leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a firm, yet compassionate, whisper. "Miss Thompson," he said, his gaze steady. "You want to sit down for what comes next." The law office of Sterling and Vance was a world away from a warm, faded comfort of the diner. It was a cage of dark wood, rich leather, and silent, polished judgment. Mara sat in a chair that felt too large and too soft, her simple coat a stark contrast to the refined atmosphere. She was surrounded by a dozen well-dressed people, their faces masks of polished grief and sharp, undisguised curiosity. Their eyes, cold and assessing, scanned her, and she felt like a trespasser in a garden of sorrow she had no right to enter. A woman with a severe blonde bob, Harlan's daughter, Celia, looked her up and down with naked contempt. A man in his late 40s, Elliot Harlan, sat with his arms crossed, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked. The air was thick with expensive perfume and a hostility that made it hard to breathe. Mr. Sterling stood at the head of the long mahogany table and opened a formal document. The reading began. There were bequests to charities, a summer home left to Celia, a stock portfolio to a cousin. Each was met with a stiff, expected nod. Then, Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. His eyes found Mara's, and a dreadful silence fell over the room. And finally, he read, his voice clear and unwavering. To Mara Thompson, of Harbor Street Diner, to whom I owe a debt that can never be fully repaid. I leave the entirety of my controlling stake and assets in Harlan Publishing Group to be hers without condition. For a moment, there was absolute dead silence. The words were nonsense syllables. Harlan Publishing. The name was on the spines of books in every bookstore window. A multi-million-dollar empire. Then the room erupted. What? What is this? Elliot snarled, shooting to his feet, his face mottled with rage. You can't be serious. Celia spat, her voice a sharp whip crack. Who is this nobody? The accusations flew, sharp and brutal. She manipulated him. He was senile. This is coercion. Theft. The words were weapons, and each one found its mark. Mara felt the color drain from her face. She wanted to shrink, to disappear into the plush leather. Tears of sheer, overwhelming disbelief streamed down her cheeks. This wasn't a gift. It was a target, painted on her back in gold and fury. I never asked for this, she whispered to Mr. Sterling, her voice trembling. I don't want it. It was too much. A tsunami of fortune that felt, in this gilded cage, exactly like a punishment. As Elliot advanced, his face a mask of pure fury, Mr. Sterling raised a hand, silencing the room. There is one more thing, he announced, his voice cutting through the din. He turned to Mara, his expression grave. He left something else for you, something private. He produced a small, tarnished key and placed it in her frozen hand. He said it would explain everything. The safety deposit box was heavier than it looked. Inside the cold, sterile bank vault, with Mr. Sterling waiting respectfully outside, Mara lifted the lid. There was no stack of bonds, no second fortune, just a single leather-bound journal, its cover worn soft with age. She lifted it out reverently. It smelled of old paper and a faint, faded cologne. This was it, his voice, the one he never used. She opened it. The pages were filled with the same elegant, spidery script from a note. But here it was sometimes frantic, sometimes despairing. There were sketches, a country house, a willow tree, a woman's face with kind eyes and a warm smile that looked hauntingly familiar. She read fragments of a story that unfolded over decades. A story of a younger, ruthless Arthur Harlan, a business rival named Alara. He wrote of a smear campaign of lies and ruthless tactics designed to destroy her small press. "The deal is done," one entry read. "I have ruined him." But it was her, Alara, who looked at me with such disappointment. I had destroyed something beautiful. Then, an entry from years later. "I saw her today. The girl at the diner. The resemblance is uncanny. It's like seeing a ghost from my greatest sin." Mara's blood ran cold. His attention, his daily vigil, hadn't been about gratitude. It had been about guilt. She was a living, breathing reminder of the woman he had wronged. The kindness she thought she'd shown him was just a mirror for his own shame. She wanted to be angry, to hate this man who had used her as a stand-in for his own absolution. But the raw, unvarnished pain in his words was too real, too human. She felt a confusing, profound compassion for the ghost who had gifted her a fortune born from his own misery. She reached the final page. Tucked into the crease was a small, black and white photograph. It was a woman from the sketches. Alara, young and vibrant. She looked exactly like Mara. Written beneath it, in a hurried, desperate hand, was a final command. "Find Lucinda Gray. She'll tell you who you really are." Mara stared at her own face in the photograph of a stranger. Her hand shook violently. Who you really are. The lawsuit, the inheritance, the silent years in the diner. It was all connected to a secret buried in this woman's eyes. The foundation of her life, of her very identity, had just been shattered. The address of an old phone book led Mara to a wind-swept seaside cottage, a lonely structure perched on a cliff overlooking a churning gray sea. An elderly woman, Lucinda Gray, was in the garden, tending to hardy flowers that could withstand the salt air. She looked up as Mara approached, and her hands stilled. There was no surprise in her eyes, only a deep, weary sadness. "Arthur's daughter," Lucinda said, the words not a question but a statement. "I wondered if you ever come." The word daughter hit Mara with the force of a physical blow. Inside the cottage, surrounded by canvases and the scent of oil paint, Lucinda poured tea. "Alara was my sister," she began, her voice heavy with a grief that had lasted a lifetime. "Brilliant, full of light. She loved him, you know, before he chose his ambition over her." She spoke of Arthur's ruthless campaign, of how he destroyed Alara's publishing house, driving her into bankruptcy and despair. When she lost everything, she discovered she was pregnant with his child. Lucinda's eyes glistened. She was too proud and too heartbroken to go to him. She fled, had the baby alone, and gave her up for adoption, hoping she'd have a peaceful life, far from the scandal. Mara's breath caught. The pieces were falling into a terrifying, perfect picture. "The baby?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "That was me?" Lucinda nodded. "He only found out years later. An investigator he hired tracked you to your adoptive family. He saw you were happy, loved. He believed his presence in your life would only be a poison, a reminder of the pain he caused your mother. So he watched from a distance." She looked at Mara, her gaze piercing. His silence wasn't indifference, child. It was the only way he knew how to love you without destroying you. The truth was a seismic shift in Mara's soul. Every refilled coffee cup, every silent morning, had been a father's penance. As she got up to leave, overwhelmed and reeling, Lucinda gripped her arm. "The family's suing you. They can't know about this." But Arthur kept proof. Letters, the investigator's report. He hid it all in the old house, his estate. It's the only thing that can save you now. The Harlan estate was a tomb of wealth, dark and echoing. Guided by a sketch from the journal, Mara found the old study, behind the massive mahogany desk. Her fingers found a loose floorboard. Her heart hammered as she pried it up. Beneath it lay a metal lockbox. With a surge of desperate strength, she broke the rusted latch. Inside, she found the final pieces of her story. A private investigator's report confirmed her adoption and recommended Arthur maintain his distance to protect her. Beneath it were bundles of letters never sent, filled with pleas for forgiveness to Alara and agonized messages to a daughter he could never claim. "My dearest Mara," one read, "I saw you laugh today. It was your mother's laugh. It is the most beautiful sound I have ever heard, and I know I do not deserve to hear it." Mara broke, sinking to the dusty floor. She wept, the letters scattering around her. She cried for profound, tragic love she had never known was there, for the father shattered by his own mistakes, and for the mother she would never meet. The man in the corner booth had not been a pathetic stranger, but her father, protecting her in the only way he knew how. Armed with the truth, she faced a family. In the same opulent law office, she presented the evidence. The hostility in the room deflated, replaced by a stunned, humiliated silence. They had not been fighting a gold digger, but their own flesh and blood. Mara didn't seek vengeance. Instead, she proposed a partnership. The company would remain Harlan Publishing, but with a new mission led by her, to seek out and publish the stories of the unseen, the overlooked and forgotten. She renamed her division Harlan and Gray, a tribute to both sides of her fractured history. Months later, standing in the bright, revitalized offices, she looked out at a city that no longer felt intimidating. She visited 2 graves now, one for the parents who raised her and one for Arthur Harlan, where she had installed a small plaque for Alara Gray. Some debts, she understood, weren't paid in money, but in mercy and in memory. The stranger who never spoke had given her not just an inheritance, but her identity, and in his silence, she had finally found her own voice.